Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
I'm Amber Harper from the Burned In Teacher Podcast and a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey EduMagicians, it's Sam, and before we start into this episode, I want to share with you about an amazing resource. It's called the Educator Candidate Member Portal. AAEE provides you with resources such as virtual job fairs, a job board, interview tips and prep, resume building, webinars. You can even get a copy of the Job Search Handbook digitally. So head on over to aaee.org and create your free Educator Candidate Member account today. Friends, one more thing before we get started. This episode is brought to you by my new course, Digital Portfolios from Scratch to Interview Ready. Head on over to sfessich.com/courses for more information about this self-paced, hands-on virtual workshop.
Hello, EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich, and today I have with me Laurie Guyon. She's a coordinator for model schools and NYSCATE trainer. She's from New York. She's going to share lots of fun tips for our future teachers today using edtech and online tools. Laurie, welcome to the show.
I'm so thankful to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you here. And we met as ISTE 10 leadership team members. And, our love for supporting future educators has just blossomed from there. So I'm so thankful you're taking some time today to share with us about online tools.
Yes, I think that this is an important time to have these conversations. So I'm really excited.
Oh, for sure, right? So before we jump into some tools and online strategies that you're going to share with us today, let's talk about your teaching story, because I think it's really interesting for future teachers to learn where people have come from in their career, what brought them into education, and what's keeping you here in teaching.
So that's a great, actually, I think my story is kind of a unique one. I always wanted to be a teacher. I remember when I met my kindergarten teacher that I came home and said to my mom, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be a teacher just like her. But I kind of lost my way a little bit. I hit college and I ended up getting my undergrad degree in speech and hearing science. My senior year of college, I went, this is not for me. I want to be a teacher. So I got my master's in teaching. But I entered the job market at a time that finding a teaching job in New York State was nearly impossible. So I got a job in working for an insurance company, and I did that for 7 years. And then I stayed home for a few years with my children, ran a daycare out of my house. So it was 11 years between when I got my master's in teaching and I got my first teaching position. This is where I belong. I should have been here all the way along. It took a very long time to get there. I started in sixth grade when I finally got that first teaching job. My first full year of teaching, I took on my first student teacher. So we learned together, which was fabulous. She was wonderful. She's an educator locally here too as well. And, we went on a little bit on the journey together, failed forward a lot of times, which was great. And then I transitioned from sixth grade into an integration specialist role because I fell in love with technology. Back in 2013 is when I kind of first had an iPad in the classroom and fell in love. And so I transitioned to an integration specialist, which led me into the role I'm in now as the coordinator of model schools. So my role now is completely professional learning for educators. Through BOCES, I have 31 school districts that I work with, and all the educators at the different buildings. And then I also, and you mentioned at the beginning, I'm a NYSCATE trainer, so I get to do some different global activities as well.
Laurie, that took so many twists and turns along the way. Oh my goodness. Congratulations. I'm so glad you found where you need to be and working, right now as a trainer with educators and professionals. I love how you're like, I wanted to be a teacher whenever I was in kindergarten, but in college, I decided to be a speech therapist. And then, I worked for insurance. I was not expecting that turn, Laurie. I just always assumed, you've always been a teacher.
No.
And I think that's so cool to see how everybody's journey is different, but we all get to where we need to be.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting. When I worked in insurance, I remember sitting in on my evaluations there, because you get evaluated in any job you go to, right? And I remember one of my bosses looking at me and going, "Why aren't you a teacher?" And he was right. I just think it was always where I was meant to be. I just took a very long time to get here.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. And here on this podcast, for sure, we're going to be talking about educational technology, but I think we need to address the question in the room: why should future teachers take the time to really understand educational technology for educational good and for purpose and meaning behind it, not just something that's shiny and glittery? Ooh, look at that shiny thing, I want to try it out. Or we have 5 minutes left in the class, here's an iPad, go have some fun. Why is it important for future teachers to know about educational technology tools and how it can help their students?
So I'll go back to another story. My first year that we had the iPads in the classroom, we were handed an iPad 2 weeks before school started and said, use these, see how it goes. And I didn't even own a smartphone at the time. I'd never used an iPad, so it was completely new to me, which I think a lot of people still feel that fear of, oh my gosh, this is something new. And I went on a learning journey with my students. We started figuring things out together. And it got to the point where it was almost every day I'd have a student coming up to me going, hey, I figured something out, because it was new to them too. I mean, the kids didn't have smartphones either. It was so new. And I think that's where that love for learning with your students kind of blossoms. And I think that learning technology along with your students and always growing and showing that you're always learning is incredibly important. And I do think that's why, future teachers need to learn the tech, but they also need to be learning something new all the time so they can showcase how to be passionate lifelong learners to their students, or at least model that. Yeah. So like I said, I had a student teacher my first year, and she was fabulous. Yeah. Which everyone told me not to do. They're like, wait till you have tenure before you take on a student teacher. But I'm not that kind of person to follow the rules. So, but we kind of figured things out together. She would come to me with an idea, or I would say, hey, let's try this. And we'd kind of see what worked. And I mean, a lot of times it did feel a little bit like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what stuck. But it also was such an exciting experience for our students, because it wasn't, this is how we've always done it. And they had a different experience because of that. It was, hey, we want to try this. And we'd have those discussions with our students saying, hey, what worked for you? And we'd survey them fairly often. I always had a sheet they filled out on that last week of school on, what was their favorite thing from the school year? What did they learn that maybe they didn't know? What advice would they give to students the next year? And it was incredibly powerful. And I had the student teachers do that too. And they're, as they were closing in on the end of their time with me, was ask the students, what worked, what didn't work, and why. And you get some really authentic answers when you do that. And I think that you should always be failing, right? That's the only way you grow. So I think that students need to see that sometimes you're not perfect. And I think the student teachers need to see that too, that, don't expect your first week, your first month, even your first year, or even your 10th year to be perfect. We're always going to make mistakes, and we're always going to learn from them.
There's no such thing as perfect. And I think student teachers need to hear that, because maybe there's this misconception going around like, okay, I've done these 4 years. I know what I'm doing. This first day, it's going to be perfect. And there's just no such thing, friends. There really isn't. So it's a unicorn. It really is. So let's focus our conversation here when we talk about educational technology tools. I know there's so many out there. I mean, looking at your bio here, you are Google Cloud certified, Google certified educator, Buncee ambassador, Seesaw ambassador, Nearpod pioneer, Flipgrid ambassador. And guys, there's like seriously 3 more sentences of commas with all these ambassadors. So you're edtech, Laurie, and I'm so glad you're on my show today. But if you could bring it down to 3 tools that you suggest future teachers, student teachers get started with, what would they be and why? And how do we get started with these tools?
So I always say that you don't have to be a mechanic to drive a car, right? You don't have to know everything about a tech tool to use it in your classroom. There's no difference there. But there are certain things that you want to do. And I always say, whenever you're picking a tech tool, what is the learning outcome you want for your students? So that way you can decide which tool makes the most sense to help them get there. That's going to foster that agency. That's going to foster creativity. That's going to get your students to really be incredible problem solvers. So I picked 3, and that was really hard. You're right, from that long. And I kind of picked it based on what it does, not how and how you can use it with students, maybe if you think of it that way. And the first one I would say is Nearpod. And it doesn't have to be Nearpod. It could be Pear Deck, but I'm a Nearpod lover, and I'm a pioneer for them. And Nearpod is actually the very first app I've ever used. So like I'm talking in personal life, work life, it's the absolute first app I ever used. It was one of those things when I was handed that iPad that I stumbled upon, and so it began my journey, and I've stuck with it. So it's grown over all these years to be something incredibly. It was always great. It just keeps getting better. So why I like Nearpod is that it allows for constant feedback between you and your students. You can use it in a live, lesson if you're on a Zoom or in your classroom, but you can also do it in an asynchronous setup where you're giving students that autonomy to kind of go at their own pace, and you can differentiate. But you get so much rich feedback from their draw it slides, from their collaborate boards, from their interactive, tools that they have, that it makes it such a powerful tool. So as a new teacher, when you're not sure if your students are getting it, you have the opportunity to ask that right away, because you can put a slide in or ask on the fly a question, and you can gather that information. And I mean, there's always that little bit of the magic factor, which I'm seeing less and less as kids are getting more exposed to technology. But the fact that you're controlling everyone's screen and that the screen changes, if you use that word magic, like I'm going to magically change your screen, no matter how young or how old, you're going to get a smile out of them, which I think is important too.
I definitely agree with Nearpod. It's one of my go-to tools because there's so much data you can glean from that information with your students, and everyone's responsible for their own learning. I love the different options for check-ins with students as well. And just the different pieces of content you can give to them, from a virtual field trip to a sway, to throw a PDF in there and a link. Make sure they're on the same link as everybody else, because there's some weird sites out there. You want to make sure they're going to the right one. But yeah, Nearpod is definitely a festive favorite for sure. What else do you have to share?
So the next tool that I kind of put on my top 3 is a creation tool, because for as much as you can gather a lot of feedback with Nearpod, it tends to be more that direct instruction, gather what they know. And I do think that students should be creating every day. So my next tool is Buncee. And Buncee is such a fabulous tool for students to use. But it's also great for teachers. When I'm making a presentation or I want to create a graphic, it's a great tool for that. I just pushed into a 3rd grade class, and we created Valentines for their class, virtual Valentines. But we're also doing this project with 5th graders, where we're creating virtual Valentines for seniors that are in nursing homes to be able to send them to them. And Buncee allows for that kind of creativity for those on-the-fly kind of activities. You create these boards, and then you can send them out. But you can also use it for the students to showcase their learning. For example, I worked with a 12th grade classroom. It was an honors English class, and they were talking about who gets the best healthcare. It was happened to be this one group's project that they were working on. And what the students were able to do with Buncee is find all of these diverse-looking people, put them on the screen, and they recorded themselves removing one after another to show who gets the most or gets the best healthcare. So this became this incredible image that really showcases what they were trying to say in their essay that they were writing. So it really brought that image to life of what it really is like to, get healthcare in our country. And so you can use it in really powerful ways. It's not just make a slideshow. It's showcase your learning, use it in these unique ways, and make it something that really increases our visual literacy, increases our creativity, and really kind of showcases students where they are.
I love Buncee too. So I know we have planned to discuss all the different tech tools and have my little 2 cents in here, but I love Buncee as well. I use it to create virtual vision boards, virtual Bitmoji classrooms with my future teachers. It is just such for me, whenever I use edtech with my student teachers, It has to fit 3 criteria. It has to be free because, student teacher budget needs to be budget friendly. It has to be easy to use. So I don't want them to get frustrated. I don't want them to worry about, if it's not working. It has to be easy to use, and it has to be can be used across grade levels and subject areas because I teach K to 12 and all the certifications in between. So Buncee fits that bill every time. And there's, oh my gosh, so much you can do with Buncee. Besides the things we mentioned, there's so many templates and things you can use. They have a very robust community online, always sharing ideas. One of my favorites that they recently shared was the snow globe activities. So there's so much out there that you can use for yourself as a teacher, but also I love flipping the script there and having students create with the technology.
Yeah, and if you're not sure how to use it, or you're looking for ideas on how to get a concept, going, you can go to their Ideas Lab, and it's all teacher created projects that are in there, and they're templates that you can use. I'm pushing into a kindergarten class. We're going to use Buncee to create Valentine monsters, and it's just a drop and drag type of activity, but it's super fun, right? So there's so much you can do with it, and kind of transitioning to my third. I had a tie. I couldn't decide on one. And yes, you're right. All of these tools have like a free version and a paid version. And I think that, you decide what you can afford and what makes sense and what your districts are offering. But I was kind of like, what else could really help somebody that's new? Or even teachers that are adjusting to this virtual online environment that are, because this is all new to a lot of people. So I kind of went to my tie for third being CAMI or Seesaw. And both of them allow you to annotate on the screen, and both of them allow student voice. So I'll give you an example for both. So CAMI, I did a workshop yesterday with teachers learning how to use it. And I had tweeted out that I was doing this, and a gentleman had responded, and I can't remember his name, or I'd give him a shout out. But he said that he had just done a part with a teacher, an ELA teacher, where the students put their poetry on CAMI and then use the record feature to record themselves reciting the poetry. And I thought, what a powerful way to capture their writing, but also their fluency with reading it out loud. And then for some students, that's a better comfort zone for them to share their writing or to present versus having to go in front of the classroom and present if that's the typical way to do something. So I thought that was a great use of CAMI. I work with one math teacher, 6th grade math teacher. What she does is she assigns her work in CAMI every day for the students. They do their work, and then when she's grading the paper, she uses the annotation tool in there and records herself grading the paper, where she talks through each problem. Here's where you did a good job. Here's where you kind of made a mistake. Here's how to fix it. So she's still grading, which takes the same amount of time, but she's recording that grading process, which is giving the students that authentic feedback. And I hadn't thought of using it that way, but what a great way to kind of make sure that you're having that give and take for students. I thought those were great ways to, and I mean, I've used CAMI for years just for filling in, PDFs or for adding my signature, but there's so much more that you can do with it than just that.
Oh, that's perfect. I love it. And I love how you gave practical examples for each of the tools that you had talked about. And you can use these examples across these different grade levels and subject areas. I think it's just phenomenal. Thank you Absolutely. So much, Laurie.
Yeah.
So we know that edtech can help engage our students, help interact, help motivate, get content across to them, amplify their voices when they're sharing content out there, exit tickets and anticipatory sets, all sorts of different things to help in the classroom. But I know edtech can also help save us teacher time, because let's talk about it. The struggle is real when it comes to balancing our schedules and time management. So what are some strategies using edtech that you have to share with us today about how edtech can help us save some teacher time?
Yeah, I think that, and I thought this is a great question, because that's always what teachers say they don't have enough of, right, is time. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a shift in the mindset of where you spend your time. If you leverage these tech tools, the most amount of time you're going to spend is on the front end, the creation of it, the organization of it, making sure you understand it well enough to help support your students using it. But the flip side is, in a traditional classroom, you typically don't spend all your time in that lesson planning. You've grabbed a worksheet, you have a workbook, a textbook, whatever it's going to be, where you're doing that part so that it doesn't take as much in the front end of it. But in the back end of it, you would typically spend a lot of time grading. When you use technology and you leverage it right, you don't have that, right? You all of it's done for you in Nearpod or in a Google form or wherever you're getting multiple choice type questions, it's graded for you. In CAMI, like I said, if you're great, you have to grade the papers anyway. Just adding the recording doesn't take any extra time. It's a click of a button. You're still doing the same work you've always done. So I think that when you're thinking about saving time, just know that first time you're creating, you're kind of figuring things out. It might take a little while, but in the end, that end product is going to save you so much more time. Plus, you're going to have so much more authentic assessment material or data on your students to be able to know where you should go next. And I think that's going to help save you time on knowing what your next lesson is going to be. Yep, I was teaching I taught sixth grade English at the end of the time I was in the classroom. And I was doing figurative language, and we were talking about the difference between similes and metaphors. And before a test, and I'm sure a lot of you do this, you might do a review game, and we played a Kahoot. And I realized very quickly as we were playing Kahoot that my students did not know the difference between similes and metaphors. So what I did is I flipped it on them. I said, all right, we're not having the test tomorrow because I want you to, mastery is your goal, right? So it's not take the test to move on. We're not there yet. So we're going to do a project. So I let them pick the tech tool they wanted to do, and they had to take apart a song and highlight which is a simile and which is a metaphor in the song. Some of them did it as like blackout type of poetry on like an app called Notability. Some used Buncee, some used Pic Collage. I didn't care what they used, but I wanted them to be able to give me some feedback that I know that they can identify a simile and a metaphor. But I let them do it through things that they love, like their music that they love. And, you always have that one student that's like, I'm not sure what song to use. So I always had a bank of them so I could help them out, give them some, right? So you can always give them some ideas on a song. And once they kind of get it, then they can do that. They can get it done. And then the students then finish the projects. They hand them in. I knew that they were ready. I played another Kahoot just to make sure. And then we took the test and they aced it. And that was the ultimate goal, right? Was to get them to ace that test.
I love that. It's just such a practical way, great example for them to see the content that you're teaching them in their everyday lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's always about getting those connections in, and it's listening to your students. I was the advisor for our, what was it called? It was our recycling kind of club. It was our green club. And we had one robot that we were using in that club, and my students wanted in. And so we decided, I said to them, like, how am I going to do this with one robot? We had one Sphero. And my students came up with a design of a lesson. So they did all the front work for me, and I just told them to go for it. And they created some really amazing projects with one Sphero. We actually, by the time they got to do the project itself, one of the students had gotten one as a gift, and I had gotten one for my son. So we ended up with 3, actually. 120 kids. So we still had to figure that part out on how to share the 3 robots. But the kids created incredible videos explaining, we were doing it with a book called The Lightning Thief, and they had to look at the challenge that Percy Jackson went through and compare it to the hero's journey. And they had to create a challenge for their robot. So it all kind of tied in together for this really robust lesson. But they designed the whole thing. It was not me.
That is so cool. That is so cool, Laurie. You have dropped so many tips and tools, examples. I know my listeners are going to want to get in touch with you. How can they connect with you after the show today?
So I'm very active on Twitter because my name is so hard to pronounce and spell. I changed my Twitter handle to something easy. I'm at Smile Learning.
Aww. That's perfect. That's perfect. So we can just reach out there and connect with you. Laurie, thank you so much for hopping on the show today. I know I'm excited to get these show notes done to get all the resources that you shared.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And there you have it, EduMagicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more EduMagic, check out sfessage.com and and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram at @sfessage. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.